Welcome to the NJC's 10-minute takeaway, where we will try and cram in as much information as we can into a 10-minute workshop. I'm Tom Stenson, audit trainer and head of training for the NJC, and today I'm joined by Stewart Lochrie, who is deputy chair of the NJC and founder, of Bright Coaching. Thank you for joining us today, Stewart.
Thanks for having me on, Tom.
In today's topic, we will be discussing responsibility, and our time starts now. So for you then, Stewart, what do we mean by responsibility? What are we talking about today?
It's that magical word, isn't it? So by responsibility, we mean your pupil taking control of decision making, taking control of plans to achieve goals, eventually leading to taking responsibility for driving up to test standard and beyond. It's that moment where they no longer rely on their instructor to get them to various places. And traditionally, it's happened as they get closer to tests. So we kind of lead them all the way up to driving test. It used to be the way. And then 5 lessons before the test, we would let them go and say, now it's your turn to take responsibility. But we all know now, hopefully, that that's not the way it should be. And today we're going to chat about how we can get people to take responsibility far earlier in the process, even from lesson 1.
The interesting thing that you mentioned early on there is about the pupil taking over that responsibility. Is that still including us thinking about our risk management? Because we know that pupils, especially in the early stages, they might not know what they don't know. So how do we include that in our risk management as well then?
So we have 2 levels of responsibility, don't we? We or two tiers of responsibility. We have responsibility for the drive, which is covered by risk management, but we have responsibility for learning and the process and the journey that we're on together with our instructors and our pupils or our PDIs. And while you're absolutely right, within risk management, that responsibility needs to be shared. It goes back and forward, as you know. There's absolutely no reason that we can't have responsibility onto the pupil from day one. There's nothing in any book that says that we cannot do that.
So what tips would you give people then? So whether they're ADIs or PDIs, how are we going to start including this responsibility from the first time we meet our pupils?
We start it with the decision making about what they're going to do and what they want to work on, whether that's topics like roundabouts or junctions or moving off and stopping, or goals, the difference being topic is a syllabus kind of related item. Goals are how they want to feel, what they want to achieve, what has to happen today for it to be a brilliant lesson. Every time we ask coaching based questions like that, we are encouraging our pupil to be involved in the process and take responsibility for the outcome that they want. And if there's absolutely no reason we can't do that from day one. Most of us will speak to our pupils on the phone or by message or by email before we meet them for the first time. And we can preempt, we can help them prepare for their lesson by asking them to think about these things in advance.
I had a learner recently, actually, and we'd spoken on the phone. I know that the family, we'd got up to a nursery area that we'd agreed on. And in the drive up there were a few things that the pupil had said. So I gave him one of the options I'd normally give to try and get that responsibility over. What would you like to do on this first go? Do you want to just have a go with steering? Do you want to take over more controls? And straight away he said to me, no, he says, I really don't know how to steer. He said, can I just have a go on just steering? And within about 5 seconds of him doing that, he went, I don't know what I was worried about. It's much easier than I thought it was going to be. But it was so good to see that he'd made that decision. And it was good for me that I knew that there was a clear issue for us to be able to address. And the whole lesson then sort of was built on top of that, because he was saying, actually, I'm ready to try and do something more now. And so that partnership between us, when we ended the lesson, it seemed that he went away feeling really good about it. I went away feeling really good because I felt like actually he's been very much in charge of what's happened in our lesson today within our risk management section.
Yeah, that's really good, and that's where we want to be, isn't it? And unfortunately, what that shows is that you've done a really good job at making him comfortable in making decisions like that on his own. He's not relying on you to make that decision for him. Unfortunately, the problem can be where we sometimes read things about or we see things on social media that clearly the instructor has to take responsibility in the early stages of the learning to drive process. And I kind of fundamentally disagree with that. Perhaps what they mean is they have to take more share of the risk management and the driving side of
Yeah.
it. But that does not equate at all to the fact that the instructor has to take responsibility for the decision making around goals, topics, um, routes, plans to achieve the goals. Do you know how many times, we've got this little practice area here. How many times do you want to drive around it before we stop for a chat to see how we're doing? There's no reason that we can't do that from day one on the first lesson.
One of the common ones that I tend to hear from people as well, instructors and PDIs, is they say, but when I try and get my pupils to take responsibility, they come back with, well, I don't know, you're the instructor. But do you find that's because they probably haven't been implementing it from day one?
It's absolutely that, and probably I would go a little bit beyond that. It means they haven't been prepared for a coaching approach. And
Okay.
you hear me go on about coaching approaches in other places. What it means is in the initial kind of contracting conversation, we call it at Bright Coaching, it's a general coaching term, that you've not prepared your pupil for the fact that they are going to be asked to take, that you're going to ask them questions about what they want to do, and they're going to have to put some thought into it. And then suddenly, so if you don't do that, your pupil or your PDI gets into your car and you ask them what they want to do, and it's, well, I don't know. You've thrown that one on me. I don't
Yeah.
have a clue. That whole you're the instructor kind of thing. And the same goes for PDIs. People turn up to be taught. They turn up to be trained. If you want them to turn up and be involved in a conversation and lead the conversation, you have to prepare them for that. And 99% of people are going to be fine with that. They'll enjoy it. They'll enjoy it more because that's how coaching works. They'll be involved in the process.
And I think as we've mentioned, or as you mentioned there with PDI training, as a trainer myself, I see this as an opportunity to demonstrate as well. So when I've got that PDI for the first time or the first conversation, I might refer back to that and say to them, what did I ask you to do? What did I ask you to think about? How could you do that for a learner? How did it make you feel? And if they come back thinking, well, actually, I felt positive because you were listening to what I was saying, or you were encouraging me to take more responsibility, it's a demonstration for me to go, great, how are we going to do this with our learners?
Yeah, absolutely. Now we're on to the audit sheet, isn't it? Because that theme runs through audit all of the time. Demonstrate something when you're training your PDIs, and they will in turn take that onto the learners. Yeah, it's all the same thing. It runs through it. Yeah, and it works. It works. There's no doubt about it.
So we've spoken about starting very early with the learners specifically, even potentially before the first lesson. We've spoken about potential choosing of routes and practice areas. What else can we get them to do in lessons to take more responsibility?
So once we start our lessons, I guess the next thing we're on to is feedback. So traditionally, driving instructor training, I think very much so in PDI training, we're very good at giving feedback. We're very good at, praise sandwich, that whole nonsense, that this was good, that wasn't so good, you're wearing a nice jumper kind of thing, which I'm really not a fan of. There is a place for direct feedback, don't get me wrong. Just preparing for the comments there. There
Yeah.
is a place for direct feedback, but there are good ways and bad ways to give direct feedback. The praise sandwich is not a very good way of doing that. Ideally, if we're looking to build responsibility, we want to be eliciting feedback. We want to be asking the people what they think of what they've just done. You can use scaling if you want. Scaling's a bit Marmite.
Mhm.
I think that scaling is excellent if you know how to use it properly. There's no point in asking people what to pick a number if all you're going to do is ask them to pick a number. You're as
Yeah.
well just asking them how they feel. But eliciting feedback and getting feedback, getting people to think deeply or more deeply than usual about what they just did, is a really, really useful way of encouraging people to take responsibility. And even one of my favorite things is just something like a gear change. If you've got a pupil who's struggling with gear changes, for those of you who still have manual out there, if it's clunking, just get them to pick a number, to give the gear change a number on a scale of smoothness. How smooth was that? Okay, bang. Okay, that was like a 5. Okay, just keep doing that. I'm not going to say anything. Just give me a number every time you change gear.
Mm.
Instructor sits there, doesn't do anything. Okay, that was a 6. Okay, hardly felt anything there. That was an 8. That's them taking responsibility and self-assessing on every single time they do something. And you can do that with loads of things. You can do that with, approaching a T-junction. you can do it with decision making at roundabouts and just put the responsibility onto them. And I guess the final thing, or one of the other things that we can do to help raise responsibility, comes at the end of the lesson. And it's that whole difference between a recap and a proper reflection.
Yeah.
So the recap in the car happens with the instructor, and that's fine. This is what we did, what went well. Okay, let's talk about any potential safety criticals we had, which we know the examiners are kind of looking for. But then a proper reflection, if you can get your pupils to the stage where they are taking responsibility for sitting down 5 minutes in a room somewhere in between this lesson and the next one, and filling out some kind of reflection, you can then build onto that. Based on that reflection, come back with a goal and a topic for your next session. And then it's just cyclical. It just keeps going like that. They're reflecting on their own. They're taking the time. They're deciding what they want to do. If they want to do something new, then they take responsibility for going to research that. They come into the lesson, and before you know it, they're doing a briefing for you. And we don't, and obviously they're not going to get it right 100% of the time. But the point is they're doing the work, and that's how we get them to take responsibility.
Fantastic. Well, there's some brilliant advice there. We are at the end of our 10 minutes. So thank you very much again, Stuart, for joining us.
Thanks, Tom.